Joining us now on NCW Live Channel is Mick Lamar. He's the chief of Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue. He's here to talk about an ongoing issue with space needs, the growth of the upper Wenatchee Valley, and things that the fire district is looking to in the future to maybe meet some of these space needs and expansion needs. So, Chief, thanks for taking some time out to come on down and talk to us here.
Thanks for having me this morning, Steve.
I'm sure we're going to need a lot of backstory on this, so maybe you can give us some background on what is occurring up in the Plain area.
Well, what we found is that 2 or 3 years ago we hired an outside consultant called ESCI, Emergency Services Consulting. They're a third party out of Oregon that comes in and evaluates service delivery for emergency services organizations to see where we're at currently, where we need to be in the future, how we can be prepared, and how we can get ourselves better aligned to meet the needs of the community. Out of that study, our community let us know that there's 3 to 4 areas they wanted us to focus on. The obvious is fire responses. The second is emergency medical responses. The third was disaster preparedness, which kind of popped up high on our list that we weren't expecting. And the fourth was fire prevention. Out of that, we began to do an internal look with our own internal customers, our firefighters, our board of commissioners, and external members of the community to say, okay, what are we going to need in the next few years? So it was certainly identified that space was going to be needed. We've seen an increase. In 1995, as an example, we had 65 fire calls in the area. In 2016, excuse me, we were up to 280. So you can see there's a progression here that goes. During the recession in 2008, real estate moved fairly slow through our area, as it did in most communities. And now we've seen an uptick in building and construction, just like you have down here in the lower part of the valley. So we started looking at space needs. And what we found out was that our current buildings were built back in the 1990s, and they don't fit modern fire trucks. We have expanding training needs. The public comes to the fire station for more things. And so we took a look at the 4 facilities that we had in Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue. I don't know if you remember this or not, but a couple of years ago we took District 4, which was the Ponderosa, District 9, which was up in the Lake Wenatchee area, and merged those 2 districts into one. So we now had 4 stations. 2 of those stations are on what we call leased property. One is with the Park Service, and we just extended our lease to 40 more years, so we're able to stay on that footprint up on the Lake Wenatchee Highway. One is a piece of property in the Ponderosa community. It's a small lot that we have a station, and we just extended our 25-year lease on that piece of property. Our third station sits out at Chihuahua Pines and is kind of encumbered on one side by the highway, one side by the river, and one side by a private property owner, so that building cannot expand. So we took a look at our station in Plain, which is next to Cascade's Beaver Valley Elementary School, and that's a site that looks central to our area. If you drew a 10-mile radius around that station, a propensity of our homeowners live within 10 miles of that station, central to the community. And the school district next door had 10 acres. They bought back in the late 1990s, early 2000 period, built Beaver Valley Elementary School. So we had reached out to them and said, at any point in time, if you don't use your excess land, if you're interested in getting rid of it, we would be interested in acquiring it so we could increase our footprint for development in the future.
Now, when was that?
That was about 2 years ago we contacted them. However, last fall, they reached out to us and said, we are interested in letting go of that property. Originally about 6 acres, now it's down to about 5, and it co-joins the property we have there currently.
So has the school district been voted to surplus that property then?
No, they don't. Like any government entity, they have a series of steps they have to go through. First was letting us know that they were interested in potentially letting go of it. Then they needed to do some internal reviews to make sure that the school wasn't going to have a need for it. And then they have to go through a series of steps that the RCW spells out about surplusing government property.
Right.
And they're just going to take that into consideration on the 25th of this month to decide if the property meets their needs or if they can access it. After they access it, there's a series of steps that they need to go through, public meetings, time constraints before they'd be able to release the property.
Now, I know that this has become something of a community issue, certainly, land being at a premium as it is. A lot of different, maybe competing uses for that property, but how does the community feel about it?
Well, I won't say there's a 50-50 split. There is a small group, very vocal, who are what I call the most impacted people, people who would live on the street where we might expand to. And they came to us with what I thought were some reasonable issues of concern: noise, light, traffic, those kind of things that you would expect. Those are mitigatable things. We can fix those things if we develop that property and when we develop that property. Right now, we don't know that we're going to get the property, but if we were, and we made some assurances in a public meeting that we would allow them to sit in on the development team to be able to design the station. One of the cool things about fire stations, we built that station that's there now in 1995. We were the only building in the area in 1995. Pole buildings were the thing. They were just what happens in the country. Now fire stations are built by architects who go into a community, look at the setting, look at the environment, and try and build a building that fits into the community. So we assured them we would allow them to participate in that. Subsequent to that, however, they've come up with some different problems that they think they see going on there, and we've had to rebut them. And
so how much of this would be, let's say, NIMBY?
Well, that's a term that's been used. I was not familiar with that term till it was used in a public meeting.
Not in my backyard, is the acronym. Yeah.
And it is not in my backyard. And when we first started this discussion, unfortunately, that's the direction it kind of took. We support the fire department as a term the opposition uses a lot. They're very pleased with the level of service and our professionalism, but they did not want a fire station in their backyard. And so they began to say, well, move it here, move it there, take it here, do this, do that. And those locations were not as appropriate for what we need operationally. And then unfortunately they fell into what I call what you see anytime a big box store comes into a neighborhood, a fast food restaurant comes in, an interstate
PUD
exchange.
has the same issue with substations.
There you go. Everybody deals with it with public works projects. And since we use taxpayer dollars, one of their comments was that we reached out for low-hanging fruit, property that was right next to us, that another public entity, that you could get it at a cheaper rate. And I thought yes to all of those. That all makes pretty good sense, because I'm not spending Mick Lamar's dollar, I'm spending the taxpayer dollars. And I think we need to get the most bang for the buck.
So what are we looking at in terms of growth needs for the district going forward?
Well, the first thing we need is space. As I mentioned before, fire trucks. Fire trucks are much larger nowadays than they were. I started in this business 40 years ago, so fire trucks were old and small, and now they hold up to 6 people. They hold a lot of hose, they hold a lot of tools and equipment, so just space inside of buildings. We actually have 4 or 5 trucks that we farm out during poor weather, especially in the winter. We put them in storage units in people's garages, so we need the extra space for vehicles. Training, we have about 30 firefighters. Back in the day, we were around 12, 15 to 20 firefighters, so the added training space. And then, as you well know, you've been up in our area when we've had some of these complex fires that have come through the area. Teams come into town, and these teams primarily stay at the fish hatchery, but they send branches out into our area to be able to protect our local community. We'd like to have an area where they could come in and operate and directly tie into the community. And so it seems like an important gig for us.
Well, a lot of things had to happen. First of all, the school district has to act, and certainly the community then has to come together also on a plan moving forward. But I'm sure that that you feel comfortable that you have a plan that would fit in nicely with your community.
I think so. The fire service is one of those jobs that comes with instant credibility. Steve, if I took this uniform on and you put it on and walked outside, the sheer appearance of the uniform, people trust you. And that's a good thing and can be a bad thing, because it comes graciously, automatically, but could be lost in seconds, as you well know. And so we don't want to do anything to impact our community negatively. This has been troublesome. It's caused some sleepless nights. We're a pretty unique community up there in the Upper Valley, in that we're pretty resilient and independent, but we find ourselves with a lot more of our neighbors and friends coming from the west side as a vacation spot to buy secondary homes. It's changed the demographics of our community.
Well, this is the time of the year, too, that search and rescue also pretty busy up in that area.
It is. I call it a system. You have to have a system to be able to provide public service, especially in public safety. It involves the sheriff's office. It involves both the dispatch center right across the street here at Rivercom, the fire department, ambulance services, volunteers who come up. If I could just take a second and tell you about volunteers, because I'm pretty passionate about this. Everybody knows across America that volunteerism is shrinking. It doesn't matter whether it's your church or your Little League or the Rotarians or the Lions, Kiwanis. Volunteer fire service is not any different. A lot of that's driven by just the way the world moves today. A lot of it's driven by the regulations that are placed upon the fire service. I laughed that when I joined the fire service almost 40 years ago, our fire department had a keginator and a pool table. and that an activity focused around the keg and the pool table. The fire service isn't like that anymore. That's a good thing for the public. But because it's not such a social thing, it's turned into real work. It's a pretty difficult atmosphere. And let me explain briefly. We ask our volunteers to settle complex problems in complicated situations under heavy duress that involves lives. And that's volunteering. You're not getting a paycheck for that. You're going to come out. You're going to walk away from dinners and birthday parties, anniversaries, Christmas. You're going to spend some time seeing some things that are unpleasant to see, but the rewards are immense. And so my job as a fire chief, our elected officials on the Board of Commissioners, their job is to make sure those firefighters have everything they need to be able to continue to support the volunteer fire service as long as they can.
Again, we're talking with Mick Lamar, Chief of Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue. And while I've got you here, Chief, we're into another fire season. How's it looking so far?
Well, as you well know, Steve, fire moves uphill, literally. So the basin starts to see the fires first. We see them out in Grant County. We saw them over in Soap Lake last week. We had a lightning storm move through here the other night. Takes 3 or 4 days for those fires to pop up. But fire season's upon us. And in our particular neck of the woods, one of the things that we're seeing now is outside agencies like the University of Washington, Portland State University, Washington State, even the DOD, FDA, the Forest Service, all changing their opinion on how we look at treating the forest. Our forests are unhealthy. They're dangerous. And up in Plain, we live in the middle of that danger. We have to be prepared and have great partnerships to respond to our folks.
Well, we wish you the best of luck. Stay safe out there, first of all, to you and your crews. But again, thanks for joining us, Mick, and hopefully this whole land issue will be resolved to everybody's benefit.
Well, I hope so. Can I share a quick personal story with you?
You betcha.
So I couldn't make an interview with you last week because I was overseeing my daughter after a medical emergency. The irony here is not lost on my family. 40 years ago, I started the volunteer fire service on Whidbey Island in a small rural department we just talked about. We didn't have many trucks. We only had a few buildings. We weren't trained to do extrication or EMS. We began partnering with our local hospital district, putting ambulances, training our firefighters to be EMTs. My daughter suffered a heart attack here 3 weeks ago.
Oh, goodness.
And that system saved her life. Now, I don't live there anymore. I'm not part of that system anymore, but there are volunteers and people who stepped up. The young man who drove the ambulance that my daughter was in was a young man who was a toddler, came to our picnic breakfasts, our picnics, our Christmas parties, grew up to be a cadet firefighter, became an EMT, and responded and helped save my daughter's life.
What a story. How is she?
She's doing great. She's up and at 'em. She was only 44 years old, and the doctor said if it had been 64, you'd probably have some other issues, but you're 44, life's looking good. We're very excited and ecstatic. We're very grateful to the firefighters and paramedics that studied hard and learned skills that saved my daughter's life. And that's really, I know in Plain, there's some people that say we're protecting a way of life. What we want to do is protect lives. That's our job. So.
Well, good luck to you, and I'm so happy for your family.
Oh, I'm ecstatic. I can't tell you how grateful I am for that.
I bet you are.
I am, Steve. Thank you for your time this morning.
Not at all.
We
Chief
appreciate
Mick
it.
Lamar, Lake Wenatchee Fire and Rescue, joining us today on NCW Live Channel.